So Lisbon, the capital, sort of an interesting mix of San Francisco meets Morocco. It really is. It's very similar to San Francisco in a lot of ways. It's about the same latitude as San Francisco. It has a bunch of hills. Even has this bridge, looks kind of familiar. It's the same guy who designed the Golden Gate Bridge. This is the 25th of April bridge, crosses the River Tejo in Lisbon. Of course, trolley cars, just like you see in San Francisco. And then this Manueline architecture, very distinct to Portugal, that sort of looks like it's something of a combination of Gothic and Moroccan. Also these tiled buildings everywhere like you would see in the Middle East. And it's also an interesting city of sort of old and new. So Lisbon's a very old city, has Roman roots. So you see a lot of these old buildings. This is the Alfama neighborhood, very old section of town with these twisty, windy streets and red tiled roofs. But then you have these very modern structures like the subway system. This is the Oriente train station, very modern, and also the Vasco da Gama Bridge, one of the longest bridges in the world. Wow. Crosses the River Tejo. So you have this interesting mix of old and new. There's also a city of great views. Because of all the hills, there's all these different viewpoints in the city. This one is just below the castle. If you're going up to see the castle, you have they're called miradors, overlooks the Alfama neighborhood, the old fisherman's quarter. Up at the castle, which is the highest point in the city, you have this view from their viewpoint. Fantastic view overlooking the entire city. And then there's from the Santa Justa elevator, this is an old steel elevator that was designed by one of the students of Eiffel who designed the Eiffel Tower. From the top of that has a nice view of Roco Square. Lisbon, as we know it, has been rebuilt since 1755 when they had this huge earthquake, one of the biggest earthquakes recorded in Europe. And it happened on All Saints' Day. Most people were in church in the morning. And the earthquake toppled quite a few buildings. And then because back then everybody cooked with fire and used candles for light, a lot of fire started. So the city caught on fire and started burning. The earthquake then caused a tsunami which came in and wiped out a big portion of the city. So a lot of the city was destroyed. The king at the time hired this guy, the Marquis de Pombal, to redesign the city in a very modern grid plan. And he did it in record time. Within a month, a lot of the city was already started to be rebuilt, and he rebuilt much of the old city here in the little valley. This area is called the Baixa, and a modern grid plan. Before that, it was a medieval street plan with very narrow, windy, twisty streets. And you can still see some of that windy medieval plan in the Alfama neighborhood, which is on the hill tumbling down from the castle, and the Barrio Alto over here. But the Baixa area was completely rebuilt on a grid plan, and you put these squares in. Down here, up here you have the Praça Figueira and Roco Square, and down by the river you have the Praça Comercio. Some of the first earthquake buildings ever designed were built after that. So these buildings were built after the 1755 quake, and they were built with these wood joints, wood structure inside with brick and stone on the outside, and were built to resist earthquakes and shaking. Roco Square, I just love this square. I love you see this all over Portugal, the way they do the cobblestones in the streets to look like waves, kind of tying in with the sea. And remnants of the earthquake, you can still see some of it in Lisbon. Up here, above Roco Square, you have this old convent, the Convento de Carmen, and it was an old convent that destroyed during the earthquake. The ceiling fell in. You can tour it. They decided not to build it, but leave it as a memorial to the earthquake victims. The barrio, heading down from the Barrio Alto into the Alfama, you have these twisty, windy, narrow little streets. It's just a really fun area to explore. This is sort of how pre-earthquake Lisbon looked. Not a place where you could really drive a lot of cars through here. Heading from Roco Square down towards the Praça do Comércio, you have this long street lined with shops leading through this arch to the main square, the Praça do Comércio. And this is where a lot of the trolleys leave that go to Belém. It's a really fun, kind of active square, but most people in Lisbon don't really use it much. There's also a great little wine center over here at 9 o'clock where you can taste different kinds of wine. And you buy a little electronic card for a minimum of like €3, and then you can go taste all these different wines. And they change the wines about every week. I don't think Lisbon has a lot of top-notch sites. Like you don't have museums like the Louvre or Roman ruins like you'd find in Rome. But they do have some interesting small museums that are very unique to Lisbon. The Gulbenkian Museum is a small eclectic museum. It's Rick's favorite museum in Lisbon. And it's an interesting collection of jewelry and sculptures, paintings, furniture. Very kind of fun little museum. Also the Museum of Fado. So Fado music, they have their own museum. It's something that's very unique to Lisbon. I wouldn't say it's like a blockbuster site, but it's something that you won't find anywhere else. Also the Tile Museum. This is built in an old convent, and it has some fantastic tiles. Just outside of the main part of the city, you have this suburb called Belém, and there's several great sites that you can see here. The Monument to Discoveries is built to commemorate all the famous Portuguese explorers. And one of the reasons that Portugal became such a strong seafarer was this revolution in ship design called a caravel. And here you have Henry the Navigator in front holding one of those caravels. Some of the Portuguese explorers were really responsible for discovering a lot of the world. So you had Diaz, Vasco da Gama, Cabral, who discovered Brazil, and Magellan. So one of the other main sites that you can see in Belém is the Monastery of San Jernimo, which is built in this Manueline style of architecture, very unique. Beautiful gardens in front. And the Belém Tower, which is another sort of Manueline style, used to be the sort of guarding entrance to Lisbon Harbor. The Carriage Museum there is a whole museum of different royal carriages throughout Portuguese aristocracy. But my favorite site in Belém is this little pastry shop. They have these little custard tarts you will see all over Portugal. They're called Pastéis de Belém, but that shop is the original one that makes them. And for about $2, you can go in and get a little custard tart in this tiny little shot of espresso called the bicia. Fantastic, especially when they're hot out of the oven. Near Lisbon, you have the number one day trip, I would say, would be Sintra. And it's a really easy day trip from Lisbon. You can take a train there. It's about 45 minutes. The trains go very frequently. And it has 3 palaces that you can tour there. So my favorite is the Pinna Palace. Very unique style. Looks like something out of Dr. Seuss. It's very beautiful. And it was also the home of the last Portuguese king, who they booted out in 1910. Just down the road, you have the ruins of the Moorish castle, which almost reminds me of something you would find in Ireland. It has these big stones all covered in moss, lots of steps, beautiful views from the top there. And then you have in the town itself the National Palace, which I think is the least interesting. So if you were going to visit Sintra, I would start with the Pinna Palace and the Moorish castle. Then when you go back down into the main part of the town, see how you feel, and you could see this as a last option, I would say. The hike down, if you hike down from the Pinna Palace back into town, you pass through these beautiful gardens and some wooded trails. It's a really nice little walk. And then just west of Sintra, you have the westernmost point of Europe. It's called Cabo da Roca. And it's a bit of an overrated site, I would say. The coast itself is quite beautiful. But all that's there is really this little plaque that says it's the westernmost part of Europe. And you can get a little souvenir certificate that says you were there. Not a whole lot. Another very easy day trip from Lisbon is Cascais, which is just a short train ride away, just about 40 minutes west. Sort of the weekend getaway of the Lisbon elite back in the day. Now it's got some beautiful beaches and seafood restaurants. It's just a fun little escape for the weekend or for a day if you're in Lisbon.